Hi Edwardsville students and guests. I'm kind of excited about today's lesson because we're talking about George Herbert Walker Bush. He was vice president under Reagan, and in my humble opinion, a pretty good president. In fact, if I had to rank them, I'm going to say George Herbert Walker Bush was probably number 3 on my list, behind number 1 Teddy Roosevelt, as you probably know, and number 2 might be FDR. He had a lot of problems, though. I mean, I like attributes of a lot of people who I want to put at number 2, but then there's also, negative things about them. Like Reagan. Reagan had what we consider to be a great presidency, but there were scandals that marred his administration. The Iran-Contra affair, we talked about those before. Anyway, here's why George Herbert Walker Bush was both, in my opinion, a great man and a great president. First of all, he was a World War II pilot. He served from 1942 to 1945. He flew 58 missions. He had been shot down once and went back to service. He then served in the House of Representatives, and during the during the Nixon administration, he was appointed as an ambassador to the United Nations. And that connection to foreign policy drove much of what he did later. He became the chair of the Republican National Committee, so he got a crash course in political activity. He then was appointed as the chief of the U.S. Liaison Office to China, and so his foreign policy experience from the United Nations served him well there, and it built from there. He was director of the CIA, and I am aware that the director of the CIA gets his hands dirty, or her, and at some point there's probably things that we don't know that George Herbert Walker Bush authorized that would probably diminish him in everyone's eyes, but that's the nature of that job. He was then vice president under Reagan, and then the 41st president of the United States. So his pedigree is unimpeachable. As a political public servant in the United States, he checks all the boxes. He served in the military. He served from the state level to the United States. He served in a foreign policy position. He served as director of an administrative functional agency, and then learned his craft as vice president, and then implemented it as president. I mean, it's as textbook positive pedigree as you can develop. So while he was president, he played a key role in the reconfiguration and reunification of Germany, because he was there when when East Germany and West Germany got back together. He negotiated and signed NAFTA. There's a lot of people who, in their public mind, as they think about history, like to think that Clinton did that, but it was George Herbert Walker Bush who actually negotiated and signed it. It wasn't implemented until the Clinton administration, but it was surprisingly a Republican in George Bush who got rid of the trade barriers between Mexico, the United States, and Canada, and eliminated, therefore, the tariffs that came with them. He increased. Now, this was considered to be a betrayal. This is one of the reasons he's not talked about a lot, because his own party doesn't put him really high on the list in what was considered by Republicans to be a betrayal of his campaign promises. George Bush actually increased taxes in order to reduce the federal deficit. And if you've been in my classroom for any length of time, you know that I'm okay with that. I even give credit to Andrew Jackson for doing just that. Now, he didn't spend all the money. He knew something about the economy, and he knew that, and getting rid of your liquidity may come back to bite you. But he did make an attempt to recognize the threat that deficit spending had for the future of the United States. He signed the Americans with Disabilities Act, That's a positive check mark from everybody's list. He participated in the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaties of 1991 and 1993. So he tried to help the now broken up Soviet states try to deal with and remove their nuclear weapons, because now with multiple ex-Soviet states possessing nuclear weapons, the threat of something happening was much greater. And George Bush did work to address it. He signed the Civil Rights Act of 1991, which closed a couple loopholes, and he started the Iraq War. And that's unfortunately the last one, which is what he's largely remembered for, because he started a war. On his watch, a conflict began, and Iraq had invaded Kuwait. And so Kuwait had, now this may be one of those Korean War situations where America sent some diplomatic signals that were misinterpreted, but that's perspective. So what we do know for sure is that Iraq invaded Kuwait, and Kuwait begged the United States for help, because Iraq had the third largest land army on the planet at the time, maybe fourth behind China. And it was massive, tons of tanks and infantry. And the United States did come to the help of Kuwait. And I watched it on television. I was in the military at the time. I was in the Navy. But we were doing a refueling overhaul for an aircraft carrier. And so I was in an apartment in Newport News, Virginia, watching it on television. And it made America feel good about being American. It was fairly quick. It demonstrated our technological superiority. And after the Iraq War of the early 1990s, no nation ever wanted to fight the United States in a conventional land war again. We demonstrated that the land wars we knew it came to an end. It's not possible. You simply cannot fight against the level of technology the United States possessed. So we see, and after the Iraq War, a change in the way conflicts are fought across the globe. They tend to be smaller scale, they tend to be guerrilla tactics, they tend to be terrorist activities. Nobody's going to line up on a field of battle and try to fight a conventional war. Technology has changed that. That's what the Bush administration demonstrated in the Iraq War. So ultimately, the reason that some of us need to know about George Herbert Walker Bush is that he is the last president on the AP U.S. History exam. And so in the future, or present as you're watching this, some students may use this video for a time where the test includes him, but that's not 2020. The 2020 test ends probably early Cold War. 5 things, Atchison, etc. So I hope you've enjoyed today's lesson about a president I find to be a great man and a great president. So I've had a bunch of people comment that my political perspective is very clear because I talk good about one party. If you go back, that's not true at all. I have to admit, I'm not terribly much a fan of Jackson for obvious reasons, but I'm a huge fan of Teddy Roosevelt and George Bush, and I'm a fan of some things that Clinton does, not everything, wink. There's good, here's what, I've said this in class before. We cannot engage in the great man theory, where we point to someone and say, that's a great person, they crafted history. Look, everyone's got good, everyone's got bad, everybody. Maybe near the end of next week, I'll try to figure out my top 5 presidents. And you can post yours either in the comments or send them to me on some platform, because I'm interested. I want to know what other people think about presidential history, especially after I'm the one who interpreted that history. I want to see the results of that. It's likely, though, that your peers and your parents have crafted that to a much stronger degree than I have. So I hope you enjoy your afternoon. It's not raining yet. It's not sunny, but you can still go outside. Do that.